Hello, I'm Albert, lead designer of Crooked Tower, and I'm here today to tell you how to play Possession, a Daemonic Card game. With what you get in the Kickstarter, you can play Possession in 4 ways: Standard, Campaign, Solo Mode, and the Corridors and Scream expansions. But for this video, we'll focus on the standard way of playing the game. Standard mode is for 2 to 4 players. The first thing you need to do is to choose a narrator. The narrator will shuffle the decks, deal the cards for a first turn, and has the special power of deciding how certain cards can affect the game. So it's really important to keep that in mind. Once you've decided who is going to be the narrator, the first thing to do is to shuffle the demon cards and then give one to each player, but keep it a secret, because the demon cards have special powers and you want to reveal them only when you want to play with them. The narrator will shuffle the 3 main decks: Location, Victims, and Game deck. Now, before we move any further, it's better to explain what each deck does. The Game deck is the main deck. It's composed of the cards that are going to make your hand, and these cards are Possession cards, with which you possess the victims, Equipment cards that you put on the victims to make them stronger or weaker, depending on each card, Events, which are going to make the turn more interesting, let's say, and finally the Nemesis, also known as the good guys, which you use to attack the victims of your opponents. The victim deck is obviously made up of victims. Victims are the objective of the game. You need to possess them, and they need to be as strong as possible in order for you to win the game at the end of the 5th turn. Victims have stats. These stats are life, or how long they can survive, willpower, or how hard it is to control them with your possession value, and finally strength, or how strong they are when they fight against the nemesis you send against them. On top of that, each victim has different rules that interact with either the time of day or the location where you're playing. Finally, there's the location deck. Every turn at the beginning you draw 1 location, and that will tell you where the turn is set. On top of that, every location interacts differently with victims, equipment and events, making every turn different from the previous and every game different from another game. Now, how do you set up? The first thing to do is to shuffle all the decks. On top of that, remember to take the life tokens and put them aside within easy reach of every player. What does the narrator do? The first thing the narrator does is to draw a number of victims depending on the number of players. 2 or 3 players, you draw 2 victims. 4 players, you draw 3 victims. Then you toss the time coin. If it's day, then the nemesis will be stronger. If it's night, then you draw 1 extra victim. After tossing the time coin, you draw the location. The location will tell you where the turn is set and interacts differently with the victims, so be sure to check that all the symbols of the location might affect how the victims perform this turn. You shuffle the game deck and you give each player 8 cards. Let's talk about the turn. After you've dealt the hand to every player, the turn begins in earnest. A turn is made up of 4 rounds, and in each round a player plays 1 card, obviously going in order. How does the order work? That's very easy. Take a look at your location card. It's going to say something like right, left, opposite, and stuff like that. This means that the player to the right or to the left or opposite the narrator are going to start playing the first card, and then the order is going to be clockwise. We've already talked about the cards that you can find in the game deck, but it's time to look at them a little bit more in depth. So these are the 4 kind of cards that you can play from the game deck: Possession cards, Equipment cards, Events, and Nemesis. The Possession cards. They are the bread and butter of the game, and they're basically how the economic system of Possession, a Daemonic Card game, works. Every time you play a Possession card, it increases your possession value. What you do with your possession value is obviously you possess victims. check the willpower of a victim. If that's equal or lower to your possession value, then you can control it. And remember that every round you cannot control more than one victim. Now, if for some weird piece of bad luck it happens that the total willpower of the victims you're controlling exceeds the possession value you have, then you have to lose as many victims as you need to make the balance again. Remember that victims you dispose of in this way are not lost forever. They just go back into the middle of the board for you or for other players to control again at a later stage, if and only if you or them have the possession value to do so. Equipment cards. Roughly speaking, there are two kinds of equipment cards. One, it's going to make your victims better, like a sword that gives +3 strength to your victim, or a helm or a shield that gives them +1 health. Obviously, you want those things. On the other hand, you have pieces of equipment that increase a victim's willpower. What do you want to do with them is probably to give them to your opponent's victims so that it's harder to control them. Event cards are kind of like the crazy cards in the game. They can take a turn and turn it upside down completely, if you pardon the pun. They can affect the whole board, like every single victim, or a lot of pieces of equipment, or some nemesis, and you want to be careful when you play them, because it might look good at a first glance, and then you realize after you've played it that it's going to affect your own victims as well. So be careful when you play them. In most games, you play monsters against your opponents and other evil creatures. Not so in Possession, a Daemonic Card game. Here the roles are reversed, and you being the bad guy, you play the good guys against your opponents. Nemesis cards are played against your opponent's victim in the hope either of weaken them or kill them outright. You can play only one kind of nemesis on your opponent victim at every time. So let's say you play a Templar against your opponent's victim. You cannot play on that same victim the Knight or the Exorcist, but if you or another player has the second Templar in hand, they can add that to the fight. Trap cards are a little bit different, although they are equipment cards and event cards. First of all, you have to play the trap cards only against yourself, because if you look at them, none of them have a positive effect on the game. Secondly, you can play them only if the condition on the card is met. So, for example, a barrel of beer can be played only if you're in an entertainment location. And if you are in an entertainment location, you have to play it on your own victims, increasing their willpower value, which makes it harder for you to control them. At the end of a turn, after every player had 4 rounds, you fight. Fights are important because that's how you kill, or at least weaken, your enemy's victims. So how does a fight work? You take the strength of a victim and you compare it with the strength of the nemesis, or more than one nemesis, attacking it. If the strength of the nemesis is equal or higher to the strength of the victim suffers a number of wounds equal to the number of nemesis attacking it. If the victim gets to 0 health, obviously, it's dead and you have to discard it. We're now almost at the end. How do you win? That's pretty easy. You play 5 turns, and at the bottom of the 5th turn, you count all the current health of your victims, all the current strengths of your victims, you add them together, and the player with the highest score wins. Well played, guys.